Hey guys, Ariel over here at Nyth. Today I wanted to do a little video to answer some of the questions I've got about does living in a tiny house actually save you money? So if you're brand new here, welcome. I know a lot of you guys have been following me for a long time, and I know there's new people all the time. If you're interested in a lot more details on my tiny house and stuff, check out the many other videos on this channel if you've got questions about that. But in this video, I've seen quite a few people talk about, and I've addressed this before, that there's many reasons somebody might choose to live in a tiny house, and finances is one of those, or there's several aspects relating to that, like the freedom to do things other than just work all the time and so on, which is kind of financially related for most of us as well. But I've also seen people that say it was, they found it for them to be actually more expensive than their traditional housing. So I just want to give some of the details on my personal situation and talk about a few thoughts for what makes that more or less expensive. So for me personally, as you probably know, I live here off-grid. I'm not on my own property, and so all of those things are going to come to play in this, finances a little bit. For me, I have found it to be financially the most awesome decision I have ever made in my life. Now, there's a couple factors that go into that. For one, I live in a very, very expensive area. By some measurements, the most expensive county in the country. Housing here is absolutely insane. I think about the same time I moved into this place, a one-bedroom condo just up the road, so sharing a wall with its neighbors and only coming with the dirt right underneath the foundation, sold for about $800,000. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what the housing situation is like here. I do know there are lots of parts of the country where things are much less expensive, and if you live in one of those where you can buy a little 2 or 3 bedroom house on an acre or two for $60,000 or $70,000, then this kind of tiny house that I'm living in may very well not make sense for you on the financial side. It might still make sense for other reasons if you're doing it for mobility or flexibility or other things, but financially that might not be the biggest motivator in those situations. So I am aware of that, but that's not where I live. I do love where I live. I like living in the mountains. I love the wildlife around here and all of that. So I wanted to be able to stay here, and that was my initial motivation for going tiny. So for me, it has worked out great, but I just want to say that I do understand that, depending on your situation where you live, some of these things might not work out that well. So for me, I tried to break this down to make sense in a monthly fashion. What are my actual expenses related to living here in a tiny house? Of course, I have other expenses as well. I might actually do a video on that too, but what are the expenses related to the house itself? Things that would be different maybe if I lived in an apartment or had a big single family home or whatever else I might be living in. And so the first big one is the house expense itself. I didn't build this house, as you probably know. I bought it. I have a little bit left to pay off on the loan there. My monthly payment is $265. That's what I have to pay every month, and that's not a whole lot of money. And I have been able to make extra payments every single month since I bought it. So my 15-year loan, and if you want more details on that loan, I've got a whole video, I'll try to link that below, on lots more details than that. So, but that is going to be paid off very shortly here. But that's the minimum that I do need to pay right now, $265 a month, and in a few more months that should be gone entirely. And that will take my total monthly expenses down even more. So that's great. The next big thing with most tiny houses is where are you going to park it? You need some piece of dirt to put it on, and people tend to do things like own their own land, park on somebody else's property in exchange for rent or work or something, or live in some kind of an RV park situation. All of those cost varying amounts of money. Again, that can vary a lot depending on where in the country you are located. And for me here, what I do is I trade work to the landowner. So that, for me, I have $0 into lot rent or ground property. Now I do have to have some work available because I do things for them, but that does not require any extra cash for me. Made a list here of my stuff. Electricity, so that would be a normal house utility bill for most people. I do live off-grid, but that does not mean that all comes for free, because I do use some electricity. I don't have a very big setup, and again, I got more videos about my whole setup there. But it's small and it provides what I need, and I'm very content with it. I tried to just do the math on what the initial cost was for solar panels and batteries and all those components and such, and have divided it out by the number of months I've been living in here currently. So at the moment I've spent, doing the math that way, my electricity has cost me $66 a month. Now every single month that goes on that I can use that equipment, which should all be good for another 5 or 6 years, that cost is going to go down, a few dollars every single month, if that makes sense. But I didn't quite know how to calculate that, because I can't say it's free, even though I don't have any ongoing monthly expenses, because I did have an initial startup cost to that. So I was just trying to figure out a good way to make sense of that. So at the moment I'm somewhere at a little over $60 a month is what my electricity would have cost me. But just to be clear, that was all in my initial setting up my equipment, and I pay $0 a month from there on out. Propane, I do have a bunch of propane appliances. My water heater's propane, my stove and oven, my new awesome one, well, my old one was too, but they're both propane. I do have a backup propane heater over here for when the wood stove burns out. It is spring, but it's kind of chilly today. It's been pouring all day, and so I actually fired that up for the first time in a few days just to take the chill out in here. And now I'm getting too hot sitting beside it. So I do have some propane expenses. Again, I tried to average this out, divided over a whole year. I use much more propane in the winter for obvious reasons with heating and more hot water and such, and less in the summer. But I generally fill my tanks about once a year. I've got several 100-pound propane tanks, and so I fill them and it lasts me almost a full year. So again, that's how I did my math to try to come up with like a reasonable total. And that comes out to that I spend about $25 a month on propane, which I think is pretty reasonable. The other thing I was going to say at the start here, let me interrupt my little line of thoughts, is that my goal is not to get every single expense to the absolute lowest penny amount that it could be. So I'm sure people could come up with ways to reduce some of these things even more. My main goal is to have as much money or time, because if I don't have to earn as much money, I have more time freedom, as much money or time to do the things I care about as possible, and so to spend as little as possible on the things that don't give me some great reward, whether it's giving me something I enjoy or something beautiful or something tasty or whatever. So I'm not necessarily trying to have the absolute most frugal, inexpensive life possible, but I'm trying to not spend any money on things that don't give me some reward or benefit personally, so that I have that money or time to do other things. Water and sewer bills, that's zero. I've got a composting toilet. Again, I got other videos on that, so that involves some manual labor, but no expense for sewage and no hookup for sewage. And water, again, it requires some physical effort, because as you know, I carry my water in here. Again, I've got other details about that, but that doesn't require me any money. I am able to use well water from the well on this property, even though it's a little ways from my house, and so it's great water, and it just takes my effort to carry it. So I have no sewer or water bill. That's a $0. I do have full coverage house insurance on the place. Personally, it's probably not something I will continue forever, but at the moment it's not optional, since my loan is not quite paid off. So like a normal bank, for understandable reasons, I need house insurance. So again, when I divide that, I pay a lump sum, which gives me a discount. But when I divide that over a whole year, that costs me $37 a month. And Then house repairs. So when you own a home, even if it's very small, eventually things are going to break. And so this I actually averaged out of, I've been in here for almost 4 years now. And so I tried to do an average of the few like maintenance or repair things I have had to do over time, which is very little. I've had to replace my water pump a couple times because little RV water pumps are not extremely durable. And I stained the exterior of the house. I think that's really the only two things. When I made this list, I can't remember if there's one other thing. But anyway, if I average the money spent on house maintenance and repairs over the years I have lived in here down to a monthly cost, that comes down to $10 a month. And again, some of those things are like, a new water pump is like $90. So that was a single expense, and I have many months where there was actually no expenses, but I was trying to get a monthly kind of breakdown here. Trash. I have $0 in trash disposal bills. I compost as much stuff as I can, and I have space here to do that. Anything that will break down. Paper and cardboard and stuff usually goes in the wood stove. I end up using it as fire starters, or else it goes in the compost as well. And then I do usually end up with about one little trash bag a week of other stuff that doesn't break down, and I share the trash service with the landowners of this property, and so I'm just putting one extra trash bag in their dumpster every week, and they have plenty of space, and so they're just including that as part of me living here, so I have a $0 expense for that. Then phone bills. I don't have a landline phone because I've got no physical connection to the outside world here with any of my utilities, but I do have a cell phone, and it's laying right over there, but I got an old flip phone, and it does everything I need it to do personally. I can make phone calls. It gets excellent service, especially in remote mountain areas, often better than smartphones, and I have an unlimited voice and text plan. With an old flip phone, you don't really have data. It's not a thing you can really use anyway, so it does not have that, but through a prepaid plan, my phone bill is about $19 a month. I think $19.37 with tax, and that covers my phone bills. And then the only other thing I have is I do have internet here. I'm able to do that through a wireless hotspot, and that costs me $5 a month. It's slow, and sometimes if the service is bad, it can even be a little spotty, but most of the time it works. It can take all night or 12 or 14 hours to upload some of the videos, but it works, and it's not very expensive, so that's a good option for me. So that all adds up to a total of $689.50 a month. And that's all the things I could... Oh, wait, there's one other thing I missed in there. Gasoline. This was a little bit hard for me to break down because I don't keep a completely detailed accounting of like where the gas went to. So obviously most of my gas purchases goes to driving, in my vehicle when I need to go somewhere. But a little bit of it does go to running my backup generator in the winter when the solar panels are not producing enough sun because there's so few hours of daylight and it's snowing all day. So a little bit of gasoline would go into the utility and house costs. I don't think counting vehicle travel is really part of your house costs because, if I lived in a monster mansion here, I'd probably drive about the same amount, so that's not really related to the house. But I didn't have I could, look back at receipts and see total amount spent on gasoline, but I didn't have a breakdown on, when I filled my van and then filled a 5-gallon gas can at the same time, which was which. So my total, if I break it down by a month, I'm spending about $260 a month on gasoline on average, but almost all of that is my vehicle travel. So I wasn't sure how to quite fairly break that down into what would go into the, providing the house utility side of that. But off the top of my head, I think that would only come out to being $10 or $15 a month. But even if I count 100% of the gasoline I buy, which again is mostly for driving around, I come out to about $690 a month total bills. And if I take out, I'd say it's fair to take out probably at least $200 of that as travel. So that would make my total bills just under $500 a month for the house expenses. So that's what I need to be able to earn one way or another. from, you know, some of my online stuff or through some of you guys have given me awesome gifts as well, which is great, or my other odd jobs where I garden for several people, I clean for somebody, and some of those things. So that is, I think, pretty reasonable. Like I said, I'm sure you could penny pinch a few more in some of those areas. I could, you know, probably never use my backup heater as long as I made sure I stayed home in the winter and always fed my firewood into my stove, which is a big part of my heat, obviously, and I didn't mention that, but again, that pretty much requires physical labor and not cash because there's lots of dead standing beetle kill pine trees around here and so on. So I have no lack of free firewood. Again, it just takes work. So I could do a few things like that and get those dollar amounts down just a little more, but being able to provide all of my housing expenses, you know, house and utility related costs for a little under $500 a month seems pretty reasonable to me, and is far less than, again, there's variations around the country, but far less than if I was living in even a tiny studio apartment here in town where rent alone would cost me at least $1,200 to $1,500 a month, and that wouldn't include water or electric, which would probably come up to another, depending on the time of year, somewhere between $60 and $150 a month, just based on past rentals. I've lived in here where most appliances and such are on electricity. So I would be looking at somewhere between $1,300 to $1,700 a month to cover the same list of housing related expenses at a minimum if I was going to be living in the same area where I'm living in my tiny house. So $490 something or $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month, that's a pretty big difference. So for me, in my situation, living in a tiny house, as far as house expenses, absolutely saves me money. And again, I do understand other people are in other situations and in other places. And again, if the area where you live is very inexpensive and you can buy a house attached to the ground, and mobility or some other factor that interests you in a tiny house is not the main factor. If the main thing is financially that may not be the best choice. And the other thing is, if you live in a place where it's very, very hard for you to find a spot to park, like the only options are RV parks, and they're all have a very expensive monthly lot rent, that could swing the balance the other way. So I'm not trying to promise anybody that it will work out financially like this for anyone else. I'm just trying to give you guys a good perspective on what my costs are that go into it and what the trade-off is, and why that makes so much sense for me in my situation, and why moving into a tiny house for me is the best decision I ever made financially. So hopefully that's helpful, just to give you guys an idea. I know everyone's situation is different, but to give you some thoughts and points of comparison and such if you're trying to figure out what makes sense for you on the financial side of a tiny house. And again, I realize there are many other reasons people like to go tiny, because it's cute or it's cool, or they want the freedom to move to different areas with different jobs, or to travel full time, or many, many other things. But that's just the feedback I have that hopefully is helpful to somebody on, you know, how that worked out for my side of things. Oh, and the one other thing I forgot to say, guys, is that, like I talked about there at the beginning, when that last payment is made on this tiny house, then I will not have any more of those, and that will bring my monthly expenses for, again, the house stuff. I still have to eat and so on, but the house stuff down to like $220 a month. So then is when the financial benefits of the way that's all worked out for me will really kick in, because then I'm looking at like $220 versus $1,400 to $1,700 a month for housing expenses, and that's a huge difference. So I just forgot, I wanted to point that out, that in a few more months it's going to be even lower. But at the moment I do have to finish paying that off, so I didn't want you to forget that. Thanks for watching, folks. If you're interested in more info on my off-grid tiny house life, check out some of my other videos here. And if you like what you're seeing, click the little picture of my house to subscribe, and then hit the little bell so YouTube actually notifies you every time there's a new video available. See y'all next time.